Morning, everyone. I welcome you all to the third and the final day of the 3-day international virtual conference on Fourth World Literature.
Yes, Dr.
The,
Rajan.
the day begins with a literary session by Dr. Anne C. Evan, formerly the head of the English Department, Union Christian College, Alave, Kerala, and currently Assistant Professor and Research Supervisor, School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Jain deemed to be University, Bangalore. She has held many significant academic and administrative positions in her parent college and its affiliated university. She has also served as a resource person in numerous seminars and conferences. She has several publications to her credit. We are very happy to have you in our midst, ma'am. Please take over the session. Thank you.
A very good morning to all those who are present here. It is my privilege to be talking here. I'm very thankful to Dr. Rajan for giving me this opportunity to talk about Fourth World literature. And the Fourth World literature, when we think about the Fourth World literature, we know that it talks about the literature of natives who have been colonized in their own country. And we have examples of the Red Indians in America, the Dalits in India, and Aboriginals in Australia, to name a few prominent ones. So I have chosen the Aboriginals of Aboriginal people and their literature in Australia, which has become more and more popular, is becoming more and more popular since the 1980s. Fourth world literature actually is not something that is new. It is something that has been discovered. Indigenous writing everywhere has always existed from the pre-colonial times. But because of the marginalization and the oppression by colonizers, the literature of these marginalized communities remained suppressed. Australia became a colony of the Britain in 1787. Actually, when the Britishers came to Australia, there were Aboriginals of 274 varieties of diverse kinds in Australia, living in Australia. And they had a history of about 60,000 years. But they lived a nomadic life, and it was not organized. They didn't have a script for their language. And so, as the colonizers usually do, they overpowered the indigenous population, tried to erase their very existence, killed as many as was possible through confrontation, some through diseases that were deliberately induced, hardships, oppression, suffering. And within about 100 years, the population of the indigenous population actually reduced to 25% of their original population. And then many of them were forcefully put through an assimilation method. And it was this that it worked like this. The Australian government, they passed a policy that children born of mixed breeds or from the white man and Aboriginal woman, such children were called half Aboriginals or half caste. So if the child born was white, then the child between the age of 2 and 4 was forcefully removed from the mother and put into mission camps that operated in far-off areas. And there these children were given education and food, etc. But they never saw their parents again. They were not allowed to go back to their Aboriginal roots. And so this is how we have a large number of people from I can say from 1787, if the Britishers came, this policy and atrocities that were done to the indigenous tribe started round about the same time. And so about 7 to 8 decades, the children were taken away from their parents. And writers today, the Aboriginal writers, especially the ones that I have taken over here, are mostly half Aboriginals or descendants of this stolen generation. It is called the stolen generation because they were stolen from their parents and deliberately westernized. Now, Peter Reid in 1981 was an Australian historian who first gave the term the stolen generation. And now, the first book that I would like to discuss here is Follow the Rabbit-Proof Fence. It is written by Doris Pilkington Gramira, she also is a product of the Moore settlement. That was one of the institutions where the half-caste children were institutionalized, educated. Now, there was a large degree of neglect and disease and all kinds of hardships faced by the children there. But they had no way of escaping from the camp. It was patrolled by police and other officials who kept a strict watch on the children. And of course, it had fences and many barricades, and it was not possible for the children to escape and go back to their faraway village. Follow the Rabbit Fence is the story of three girls, Molly, Daisy, and Gracie, who was abducted from their families and taken to the settlement. But these three girls, Molly, the eldest, after being in the mission house or the institution for 2 days, she missed her home. She did not like the schedule and the strict timetables that they followed. It was very westernized. And so she decided to escape from that institution, and with her half-sister Daisy and her cousin Gracie. Now, they had their native village was Jigalong, and Jigalong was about 1,600 kilometers away from the settlement. But here you have this picture of the movie that was made of that novel called Rabbit-Proof Fence. The title of the movie was Rabbit-Proof Fence. And these girls, after 9 weeks of trekking through the deserts, and many times they had to hide from patrolling policemen and other officials who were on the lookout for the girls. At one time, they climbed up a tree to escape the notice of the officials who came in helicopters searching for the girls. And finally, they reached their home, but they reached their village. But unfortunately, Gracie was duped by a stockman, saying that her mother was waiting elsewhere, and she left the group and she went, and there she was caught and taken back to the mission settlement. But Molly and Daisy, they reached their mother, and the families of both these children, both these girls, they moved their camp into the desert so that the officials would not come and kidnap these girls again. So this is the sad story of this particular novel. Now, it is an autobiographical novel. The reason why it is called an autobiographical novel is the story of Molly is the story of the writer's own mother. Now, Molly, 14, after she escaped from the settlement and she went back to her family, later on she got married. She had 2 daughters. One was Doris, the writer, and the other one was Annabelle. And then Molly had a surgery, and there were no facilities in the desert. So she went back to the settlement for her appendicitis surgery. And there they kept Doris stayed behind. She did not come back. She was not allowed to go back with her mother. But Molly escaped again after her treatment, and she traversed that 1,600 kilometers again with her 18-month-old daughter. She escaped the settlement again and she came back. But that daughter at the age of 4 was kidnapped, and nobody knows where she was. Usually when the girls are kidnapped, they are put into such homes, and then somebody adopts them. So the parents or the mother never know the whereabouts of such girls. And so Molly lost Annabel. And Daisy, she grew up, she married, became a Christian, and later on Molly and Daisy come and live together. This Molly's elder child, that is Doris, became a writer because she got educated in the institution. And so she was, and most of these half Aboriginal children who get educated, they are able to use the English language very well. At that time, the Aboriginal language had no script. In fact, Doris Pilkington, she was not even aware of her Aboriginal roots until much later. And then when she came to know about it, she wanted to write about it. And The Stolen Generation is the background of this novel. The next novel that here is a picture of the three girls going through the desert. They had 9 weeks, they walked through the desert, and they used to hunt the rabbits. Now, why the name rabbit-proof fence? Now, this is another historical detail that is very typical to Australia. Australia was actually infested with rabbits, wild rabbits. There were over 200 million rabbits in Australia that was destroying crops. Now, the rabbits were brought actually on the ship by the Englishmen themselves. There was one farmer, Thompson, who brought these rabbits in 1859 for hunting and released it in Australia. But the 27 rabbits that were released, finally, it multiplied so much that the whole of the country was infested with rabbits, and the rabbits were destroying crops. And so the Australian government decided to make a fence across Western Australia. Now, this is a map, and here you will see Western Australia on the western side. The rabbit-proof fence was divided Western Australia from the eastern side, the pastoral land and the bushland. The bushland was the desert area, and so this it was quite a ludicrous decision by the whites to make such a fence, because the fence was made of barbed wires and wooden posts. The rabbits could easily dig under the fence and get through, or climb over the fence and get through. But anyway, the government spent a lot of money and made this 1,800 kilometers fence. They even appointed a whole battalion of officers. They were called boundary riders, to check and maintain the fence every 200 kilometers. Now, one of this boundary riders, now most of these boundary riders were, they married the Aboriginal women of that locality, and children were born to them. And that is how Molly married. That is how Molly's mother. And the same thing happened with a lot of the women there. So these children, half Aboriginal children, were mostly children that were born from white fathers, either boundary riders or some officials, who inspectors or police officials or something like that. But it was usually the mothers with whom the children grew up, and at the age of 2, they would be forcibly taken away. So Doris Pilkington writes about the 3 girls and their brave effort to go through the desert, the determination, the attachment to their indigenous roots, their family. They could have lived a very comfortable life in the mission settlement, but the girls are so attached, and that is something that is said about the indigenous people. The white men, they wanted to reform, change, and transform the indigenous people, erase their language, change their culture, and make them European. But the indigenous people actually, they came mostly from this Torres Strait island. There were about 274 islands here, and they were dark. They were racially dark, and most of them, they settled in this area. The islands came under the control of, or the government of, Queensland. So it was in this area that many of them settled. But since they were darks, they were dark because many of them had connection, or they were related to the inhabitants of Papua New Guinea, that is African. So that is why these Aboriginals are dark. So, and it is in Queensland that many of them stayed, but made settlements. Then here in New South Wales also, we have another novel that comes with yeah. Here is the next novel by Sally Morgan, My Place. Sally Morgan, again, born in 1951. She is a half Aboriginal. Her mother is Gladys Morgan. Her father is an English soldier who died by alcoholism quite early. She grew up with her mother and grandmother, her grandmother Daisy. Now, Gladys, we are told later in the novel that Gladys also is a half Aboriginal. Her father is also white, and Daisy's father is also white. So 3 generations of half-caste women. Now, Sally, at the age of 15, when she is put into the school, she faces discrimination. And when she faces discrimination, she asks her mother what her race was. And her mother said that she was an Indian, meaning a Red Indian. But that did not satisfy her, and she began her quest for her ancestry. And that is how she discovered her Aboriginality. And now, another fact about the Aborigines is that all records about their birth, death, and their existence is with the officials and the police, the government officials, and these records are never shown to anyone. So when Sally Morgan wanted to, at the age of 15, she started, after her graduation, she did her graduation, and then she was also a product of the Moore Settlement Institution. And after her graduation, she started searching for her ancestry. She was faced with severe roadblocks, in the sense that there were no records of who her grandparents were, where they came from, and which region they inhabited. So then what she did was that she used the oral tradition. She started talking to people of her mother's generation and her grandmother's generation, including Gladys and Daisy. Now, in the beginning, these 2 women were very reluctant to tell her the truth, but she persuaded them to talk about their past, and it is then that they told her how they had been treated, how they had been separated. Both of them, they had suffered a lot as Aborigines, and the white men and the white government had brought out policies, and both of them were victims of the stolen generation, Gladys and Daisy. And but about Sally Morgan, she marries, she has 2 children, and when she discovers that she is an Aboriginal, she connects with her community. She does not give them up, but she connects with her community. And her story, My Place, won the Miles Franklin Literary Award, one of the greatest awards in Australia. It is also an autobiographical novel. And this is My Place, actually, the very title, as the very title, it is a self-consciousness and an awareness of her Aboriginality. Instead of being ashamed of it, she celebrates it. And see, all these Aboriginal writers, their focus is to bring out the beauty of their culture. While the whites had instilled into their mind, while they are in the institutions, they are told never to speak their language, never to follow their religion, never to allow any of their belief systems to remain within their minds. But once they come out of all these writers, whether it is Doris or whether it is Sally, once they realize their Aboriginality and they are so thirsty to know more and more about their community, learn their language, and there finally they find peace because they find their place. they realize that they can never become whites, even if their skin is white slightly, but their aboriginal roots can never be erased. So that is what Sally Morgan is trying to say in this particular novel. That is what she's trying to say. And she says that in the beginning, she was full of anger at all the atrocities that her community had gone through. But she does not write the book in anger. She gives a very objective picture of her family, herself, her mother, her grandmother, and also her grandfather. Her grandfather was an Englishman, like her father. So that is My Place. And then we have Kim Scott's novel Taboo. This also won the Miles Franklin Literary Award. Now, Kim Scott belongs to the Aboriginal community Noongar. And while My Place and Rabbit Fence are stories about the stolen generation of the 1900s, 1920s, 30s, Kim Scott's novel is based in the present. As you know, it was published in 2017. And this is a modern representation of the Aboriginal people in Australia. So when you read Taboo, you realize, or you get an idea of what is happening at present to the Aborigines. And in this story, Kim Scott weaves the story around a place. It is called the Massacre Site, Massacre Plain. And now why is it called the Massacre Plain? Because there, a lot of Aboriginals were massacred at one time because a white man abducted a black woman. And in revenge, the Aboriginals assassinated the white man. And then in revenge, the whites came and massacred the entire people in that village. So it is called Massacre Plain, and it is considered a taboo. That whole place is a taboo for the Noongar community, for the Aboriginal people. And they keep away from that place. Now, this group of youngsters, they are invited to attend an inauguration of Peace Park. That is going to be reopened, and that the invitation has been given by Dan Horton. He is the owner of the farm which witnessed the massacre, and he is fulfilling the death wish of his wife by inviting the youngsters for the ceremony. So now when the youngsters come there, they realize that the whites there, the hostility is much less. And we feel that reading Taboo, we feel that the transformation of souls, the reconciliation between these two sections of people, the Aboriginals and the non-Aboriginals, that is the whites or the Europeans. This reconciliation is being affected in some small ways because during the bicentennial celebrations in Australia in 1970s, 80s, the policies, the harsh policies of kidnapping the half-caste children and punishing the Aboriginals, killing them by various methods, such harsh methods were removed. The whites, some of them at least, they brought about policy changes, and the Aboriginals were slowly won over to a small extent. So this kind of reconciliation is happening. So this novel is actually a reconciliation between the Aboriginals and non-Aboriginals. So pay back eye for eye, or pay back in kind in the same way in which you have been hurt, is no longer the scenario where the whites and the Aboriginals are concerned, we can say, to an extent, though a lot yet has to be done. So Taboo is a beautiful novel written in English by Kim Scott. We have this another novel, Tara June Winch. This was brought out in 2021. This also got the same award, The Yield. Now, in this story, or in this novel, Tara deals with the Wiradjuri community to which she belonged. Her father came from this community, And this is a community that is one of the oldest and quite a prosperous community before the English came. And it has history of about 60,000 years in Australia. Now, this novel has three narratives. It begins with the funeral of an old man called Poppy, and for the funeral, his granddaughter August has come. And when she has been away in England for 10 years, though she is his granddaughter, she has not acknowledged, she was not very much taken up with her roots and ancestry and all that. And she has just come to attend the funeral. But when she comes to attend the funeral, she is confronted with a problem. The hometown where her grandfather lived, the house where he lived all these years, Prosperous, the house is called Prosperous, that is going to be destroyed, and tin mining is going to be done there by the government. And when in the beginning, she is not very worried, but then she realizes that she cannot let land go. Now, this whole concept of letting the land, that is again this idea of terra nullius. That is the concept. There's a Latin word meaning that land belonging to no one. In Australia, actually, when the Britishers came, though these Aboriginals were there, they made no fences. They were nomads. So they kept traveling, or they kept moving from place to place according to the climate, according to many other conditions that dictated their shifts. So as a result, the English argued that they did not possess any land. So this concept of terra nullius, the Aboriginal, even when the Aboriginal lives in a place, he is not entitled to that land. That was the policy of the government. So this is the concept of terra nullius is given, a glimpse of it is given when August, she gathers a momentum of resistance and joins the resistance against the government, not to allow the tin mine to be started there. And then the third narrative voice is that of Reverend Ferdinand Greenleaf. Now he's a missionary who felt that a lot of wrong had been done to the Aborigines by the English, by the white people, establishing that it is the right, because the argument of the white was that the Aboriginals were they were uneducated, illiterate, primitive, the usual narrative which the colonizer gives regarding the colonized. The same was said about Indians when the Britishers came to India. The same is said about the Red Indians when the Americans, whites, came to settle in America. So this narrative of the illiterate or the barbarian being the uncivilized, being civilized by the whites, being transformed to a good human being. The whole concept of good is again relative. Sometimes hearing some of the stories, we feel that the Christian whites were in no way better than the pagan or the non-Christian Aborigines. The Aborigines, they had their religion, they had their belief system, and they had their ethics, which they followed faithfully, but they were told that that is not right and this is what is right. So this interaction between Christianity and in the religion itself, the Christianity and that of the Aboriginals, that itself did not have a very encouraging beginning. And Reverend Ferdinand Greenleaf felt that this is not the way things should have moved. So the letters that he wrote to the government, that forms the third narrative voice. So with these three narrative voices, Tara June, she writes this novel, The Yield. Now, once again, I forgot to mention, Poppy is, the old man was compiling a dictionary. And that language is a very important aspect in this novel, because the language, it is a lot of words, English words are given the Wiradjuri equivalent. And so you realize that there are certain words that has no equivalent, and every alternating chapter has one word. So in Virajuri and its English equivalent. So in one way, Tara June is actually educating the readers on the language. And the language of the Aboriginals were over 600 languages, about 300 languages. And out of the 300 languages, it had again about 600 dialects. So that was the richness of their language. But it was mostly oral. And it was oral because they did not have script. Now their written language is coming and translations are coming now. But otherwise, the Aboriginal literature begins in English because all these writers were educated in the English language with a Western education given to them by mission camps and settlement institutions. So I would like to say that at the end of it all, we can say that Australia has a hybrid population and culture. The Aboriginal people belong to that country, but as much as the whites. And when you compare, the history of the Aboriginal people is much older than that of the whites. So a new canon in Australian literature is slowly emerging that uses oral tradition, performances, letters, myths, dreams. You know, the Aboriginal people, they hear voices in the wind. They can read the language of the desert. So all these kind of things are not there in the white Australian writings because they follow the literary genres of English literature. So this is the richness of the Aboriginal writing. And Sally Morgan, Tara June, Kim Scott, the ones who got these awards. And there are many, many. I have just chosen a handful of writers, just 4 of them. And the text that I have, there is just one more text that I would like to talk about. And that is Sally Morgan's short story, The Letter. Here you have a phenomenon where the half Aboriginal girl refuses to acknowledge her Aboriginal mother. She has been taken away from her mother at a very young age, brought up in the institution. She later gets a job, marries, and has children. But in the beginning, her mother did not know where the daughter was put. And later on, when the daughter becomes an adult, the mother traces her address and sends letters to her, which returns unopened. And that is why the title of that short story is The Letter. And this mother, she's so full of, this is the only daughter, she's so full of love for her child, but the letters are never opened. And finally, she writes a letter, gives it to her sister, which is delivered to the daughter after her mother's death. And it is then that the daughter calls back her auntie, her mother's sister, and says that I'm coming home. But of course, her mother is not there. So she has already passed away. So this is also there, that there are some Aboriginal girls, because they blame their mothers for being taken away, abducted, and somehow they are made to believe that their mothers didn't care enough for them, did not love them enough, did not educate them enough. So these kind of negative stereotyping is done as usual by the colonizer. So there is a lot of unhappiness, unnecessary unhappiness that comes in families between the mother and the children. And this is a very, very sad fact of the stolen generation. This is the fallout of the stolen generation, that numerous thousands and thousands of children went through this kind of pain. Some died in the institution. The mothers never knew that their child had died. So this is what I have to, it is just an introduction to Australian Aboriginal writing, and many more writers can be covered. And I would like to invite some questions from anyone so that I can clarify. And are there any questions? If there are any questions, I would like to answer them or clarify any doubts. Yes. Tell me. There is, I feel that this is a very rich area for research. You know, when you compare the Aboriginals of Australia, the Dalits of India, and the Red Indians of America, the literature that is becoming popular now in English, a comparative study would be good. Because there are a lot of commonalities between these natives who have been colonized in their own land. And land and language are the two very important determinants, or rather, that that influence their life, their attachment to the land, and their non-existence. Even when they exist on the land, they are non-existent as far as the whites are concerned. And that is a terrible condition, you know, when the land in which you have lived for so long, and it is you don't belong there anymore, or you have no right to that land. So there is actually throughout these novels, all these novels that I have taken, they are life writings. Yes, they are life writings, but they are also political narratives. Because in the context of all these novels are the ridiculous policies that are brought out by the white Australian government to oppress and subjugate and erase the Aboriginal population. One another point I would like to add is that Aboriginal writings or Aboriginal literature is not just autobiographical life experiences of life writings alone. There are two sections, or there are two categories for all these indigenous writings. One is, of course, the life stories that they write about, lived experiences, and the other is the myths, legends that belong to that community. So therein lies the richness of such literature. You come to know about belief systems and customs and culture, very quaint belief systems and cultural practices that exist in many different parts of the community. As I said, the community itself is there are about 274 islands, Torres Strait Islanders they're called. There are as many indigenous communities there.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
Am I
Ramya?
audible here?
Yeah,
Ma'am,
yeah.
I just that was really nice speech, the presentation, ma'am. I enjoyed, and that was a very unique comparison between Dalit in
Yes.
India and aboriginals in Australia.
Yes,
But
yes,
one thing I would like to know, I'm very curious about all this aboriginal study is, I understand we are becoming more aware of these cultures which we usually don't care or don't bother
yes,
about,
yes,
and through literature, through all the research that have been conducted, we have been learning a lot of things.
yes,
But
yes.
my curiosity is how these benefits those aboriginals, how these literature or the research happening about them benefits them, and does it
Uh,
progress
bene-
them, or how?
yeah, benefits them is, as I said, in all these autobiographical writings, there is a political motive also. And what is a political motive? In making the world believe, understand the truth about the aboriginals, whether it is their whether about their culture, whether about the oppression. See, unless Sally Morgan, Doris Wilkington and all had not written way back in 1987 and all that, the world would not know about the stolen generation. And they wrote in English. So Sally Morgan's My Place was, it sold millions of copies, because the people, whoever knew English, took that up and read it, and they were simply aghast to know that this is what had happened to the aboriginals. This is what was being done to them. So that is the political motive. It will help. It will help to open the eyes of the colonizers. Even now, the aboriginals are, they have a right to land. The Wiradjuri community have been given land in Queensland, where they belong. But not all the communities have got it. But I hope. But I have a classmate of mine who is in Perth, and she herself is a diasporic writer. Her name is Rashida Murphy, an upcoming writer. So when I was speaking to her the other day before I prepared for this paper, she was telling me that you must tell the audience that even now, a large number of them are tortured and unjustifiably punished. A lot of it is still going on.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. And can you say there is some difference? Okay, before this is what happened,
Yes,
but after all this research and literature, something we have improved, a
yes.
kind of a mapping.
See, writers always change the world, isn't it? When
Yes,
things
ma'am. Yes,
come
ma'am.
out in fiction, things come out in poetry, or that, this has always happened, whether it is the French Revolution or whether whatever it is, our writers have always taken up. What do you think T.S. Eliot and Yeats did after the world wars?
True.
Today, when we look back at the Second Coming and the Wasteland, we know that's exactly what was happening and what is still happening, isn't it? So writers they are visionaries, whether in fiction or whether in poetry. So when writers start writing, and they write with, when these half aboriginal writers, they themselves are victims of the stolen generation. So when they write about something, it is the truth. And they are writing it in such a way that it is not simply a confession. The novels have sold millions of copies, which means the language they use, the way they have woven the text, the narrative is very interesting.
Yes, ma'am. Understood. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. I would like to get some more questions, so just to know that you all have understood what I have said. Those of you who are going to take up research, my sincere advice to them is, please branch out to these new areas. Don't keep sticking to the old English writers, and you can. Fourth world literature is a very interesting category. I would suggest that if you all can, please see the movie, the Rabbit Proof Fence. Follow the Rabbit Proof Fence. One thing I forgot to tell you is that the title of that novel is Rabbit Proof Fence, because while these girls are trekking, they are told by a farmer's wife to follow this fence to reach Jigalong, that is their native village. And that's how they, because the desert is very vast, and in the beginning they lost their way. They have no map with them, no compass with them. So finally, after walking about 800 kilometers in the wrong direction, they reach a farm where a kind woman gives them something to eat and tells them to find the rabbit-proof fence and then go along that fence, so that they don't get lost. That is why it gives the title. If you see the movie, it would be very good. That story will strike you as something that is terribly brave of the three young girls. One another thing I would like to add, Kim Scott's Taboo, which came out in 2020, shows you that the youngsters are not, they don't want to take revenge. They are being transformed in a way, the Aboriginal youngsters, and they would like a closer interaction with the whites without being bullied and all that. But there is another side to it also, which you get in another novel of Tara June Winch, Swallow the Air. And in that, she says that many of the youngsters, the Aboriginals, they have been introduced to wrong habits by the whites. And it has been done deliberately. Many of them have been introduced to alcoholism, drugs, and so they have lost their motivation. The Aboriginals, they are very driven, they are very diligent and persevering people. But when the half Aboriginal children are introduced to many of the ways of the Western culture, then they are neither here nor there. And that is deliberately done so that they ultimately destroy themselves. They make nothing of their life. So that kind of subtle destruction is also going on. Many of them have become victims of addictive habits. The youngsters, Aboriginals.
Ma'am, it's me again.
Yes.
Hope it's not a problem. I am
No,
asking
no,
another question.
no, 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 no.
Okay.
Please.
I actually posted the question and hoping it will be answered. Actually, I want to know what is the difference between indigenous and nativism, ma'am?
Uh, Nativism is an adjective,
Mm.
isn't it? Nativism is when you are a native and you show the qualities of a native. That is nativism. For
Mm.
example, when you are doing studies in immigrant writing, expatriate fiction, there you always talk about the native country, the home country, understand? And
Yes.
you talk about nativism there. That means your original country and its language, its culture. When you show that, you are showing nativism.
Mm.
So that's an adjective actually, a quality of a
Okay.
native, of a native. But indigenous is indigenous writing. Indigenous is something that is typical of a particular place. It's just a different part of speech, I think. But indigenous is a little more inclusive of a lot of other things also. As I said, when you show nativism, you might just show your preference to your custom, your culture, something like that. But indigenous is a native that belongs to a particular community. I don't think the two words are interchangeable. You have to use it in different contexts. Like when I say the indigenous writings in Australia, I cannot say the nativism writings in Australia. You got my
Okay.
point?
Yes, ma'am.
So nativism is something that you show, some quality that you show. Whereas indigenous works as a noun also.
Okay,
And
ma'am.
indigenous and aboriginals also, there is a slight difference because the indigenous people, the tribals and Adivasis in India, you don't call them aboriginals.
Mm.
You call them indigenous people. And of course, we have given them Dalits, tribals, Adivasis category, nomenclature like that. So even when the meaning is, there is something like using a word that is suitable to the context. The meaning might be the same, but you cannot use all the words in the same context.
Can I put it like this? From my understanding, I'm telling from what you said. Maybe a colonizer who have settled in Australia, and after two generation, he can call the third generation. He can call my native is Australia, and indigenous people who are from Australia itself. Maybe like that something.
No, that even if it is the third generation, fourth generation, they are still indigenous people because their ancestry is indigenous.
Okay.
Maybe their culture has changed, but their roots are indigenous. That can never be erased. That can never be severed.
Okay, ma'am.
See, this is true not just of not just of indigenous. This is also true of ethnicity. We have second generation, third generation Indians or Chinese writing from America, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
They don't even know their native language, whether it is Hindi or whether it is Chinese.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, yes, they are third
Yes, ma'am.
generation. But can you say that they are Americans? No, you will call them Chinese American or Indian American, isn't it? The ethnicity can never be erased. So no matter succeeding generations, you might, your culture, your native culture might, nativism, as I said, nativism, the element of percentage of nativism will be less. You will not know the language. You will not know how to cook certain dishes. You will not know certain customs. But your ancestry, your origins remains the same.
Okay, ma'am.
Your ethnicity can't change, no matter how many generations go.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, you're welcome. Ramya, have you done research, or are you in the process of finishing something, or because you seem to be a bright literature person?
Thank you, ma'am. I'm a research scholar
Yeah.
pursuing my research in digital humanities, digital literature in Anna University, ma'am. I have a fellow
Okay.
scholar who is in Australian literature, eco-criticism. So
Okay.
that is, we used to discuss, and he used to tell a lot of things. He has the sources he have, books he has selected is
Okay.
from Aboriginal writings and
Mm.
from the colonizers' writing. That
Okay.
how it's like a comparative study. So
Okay.
that is
Okay.
how I came to know about these things. And we
Yeah,
used to
Aboriginal.
discuss and
Yeah, the Australian literature per se is the whites writing it, and they have this bush literature. Bush
yes, ma'am.
literature is written by the whites
Yes, ma'am.
about the outbacks and all. Their experience, and that is, I didn't bring that to my topic today, but actually the white Australians, their experience is also one of alienation to the land, but it is in a
Yes,
different
ma'am.
way to the Aboriginals,
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
because they are the rulers, but their alienation is because they have left the comforts of Britain and come to this wild desert like place where even farming is difficult.
Yes,
So
ma'am. Yes,
their
ma'am.
lives, they faced their own difficulties, and that is reflected in their Australian literature.
Yes, ma'am. He used to, he has done an extensive study. I don't know anything about Australian literature. So
Okay,
he used to explain from the scratch how from the history and how it has been
okay,
now.
okay.
So
So
that is
now,
how I know, ma'am. The credit goes to him.
you can tell him something about literature,
Yes, ma'am.
Australian literature,
Yes, ma'am.
Aboriginal literature.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Okay, okay, you're welcome. The richest Aboriginal is the Wiradjuri community. That is to which Tara June Winch's father belonged. They are one of the wealthiest. Wealthy means in their this thing. I would not say in the modern standards of the whites, but how do you specify the rich? The rich is also a relative term. It's not in terms of dollars and millionaires and all that. The rich in culture and all that. That is how you call them rich.
What is their culture, ma'am?
Rich in culture, yeah.
What is their culture, ma'am?
Culture has many components. Culture has language, food, religious customs, belief systems. Then even your ethos, the way you think, is to do with culture. Because it influences your belief system. For instance, the Indians, they have this idea of the perfect woman being Sita. We call Sati, Savitri, and all that.
Yes.
That is typical to the Indian culture. You tell an American that she's like Sita, they will not know what it is. So culture includes all this. Even dress is there in culture. It's a composite of all this that makes up the culture of a person.
What is so special about the Aboriginal people, ma'am?
The Aboriginal people, for one, is that in appearance, they are like the Africans in America. Okay, that's the first thing that you must know. They are dark.
Okay.
And the second thing is that their oral tradition of storytelling, and many of them are storytelling and painting are two techniques they use for creative self-expression. Then they are very good at performances. So for them, literature includes all this: dance and storytelling and painting. In fact, Sally Morgan is also a painter. They paint very well, these Aboriginals. And then another difference that you can say is their belief system, their superstitions.
Okay.
Many of their myths Many myths and legends and superstitions which they follow is really unknown to anyone else because it is typical of that land. You know, Australia has wide expanses of land, desert lands. But to these aboriginals, it is, to us, it is like a desert land, no man's land. But to the aboriginals, it's like their home. They are familiar with all the nuances of the desert. So all these makes the aboriginal actually very different from the white who came to settle there, from the settlers. So aboriginal.
They also
Yeah.
educated, ma'am.
They are educated in their culture. They are not educated in our modern English culture. That is why, see, that is why the English took them, the whites, the half breeds. They took them to educate them, saying to educate them, not to make them officials and all that, to educate them, to make them skilled in labor. That was the intention of the whites, to take these fair aboriginals who are products of intercaste or mixed breed marriages and to make them laborers, skilled laborers or nurses. Have I answered your question?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Just I'm thinking about the peoples.
Yeah. You can actually Google and see, you know, the dance and their dresses. And though some of them, the half aboriginals like Sally Morgan and all, they dress like any of us, I mean, any of the Western people. But there are their grandmothers and all, they used to dress up like them only, the aboriginals. It is very interesting to see the way they dress, the ornaments they used, the way they danced, the food they made.
There is a treatment for Aboriginal peoples in Australia.
The treatment? You
Yeah.
mean they have medicinal medicinal?
Allowing to hospitals.
No, the hospitals treatment is given by the whites, and these settlements had hospital facilities. Now, this Wiradjuri community I told you about, it's in Queensland, and they have, that place has been given to that community, and the whites have made hospitals and all over there.
Okay.
That is what I said. There is definitely a transformation and a reconciliation interaction between both categories now.
What is the Aboriginal facts, ma'am?
Aboriginal?
Facts.
I didn't get you. What is it? Facts.
Yeah.
FACTS, facts.
Yes, ma'am.
The Aboriginal, what do you mean by facts? Facts is something, an information that has proof, right?
I want to know the indigenous and Aboriginal arts, cultures.
Arts, culture, and all that. There are a variety of them, very diverse. You will have to, that's a whole different area. You can search it and see examples of their art. Just like we have our frescoes and murals and all that, no?
Yes, ma'am.
Our figures, you just look at our Ajanta Ellora caves and all those temple art and all that. So that is something that is very indigenous in India, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am.
So in the same way, they also have. All these aboriginals have, all the native people have their figures will be different there, because they will identify with that. Our figures are mostly about gods and goddesses and lesser gods and deities and all that. All our temple art and all is full of that. But for them, they have a religion. They have a religion which is non-Christian. Whatever gods they worship, they will have pictures of that. For art, you will have to look up specially and see what kind of art they do. I have, because none of these, of course, Sally Morgan does painting, but I didn't take a look into her painting to see what kind of painting she's doing.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, you're welcome. Are we done? Dr. Regin?
Hello, madam. I'm Samuel Nagam.
Yes.
Is it over, ma'am?
No. I will answer your question. Tell me.
No.
Yes, Samuel?
Hello.
Yes.
Good morning, madam.
Good morning.
My name is Dr. R. Prabhakar, madam.
Okay.
I would like to know something.
Yes.
I had gone through the novel Things Fall Apart, written by Chinua Achebe.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would like to know the answer. I would like to clear my doubt that do you consider Things Fall Apart as a post-colonial novel or the novel which falls under the yoke of third world literature, fourth world literature?
Fourth world literature. It is, the theme or the subject matter is post-colonial. It comes under post-colonial studies because it is talking about the arrival of colonization and the harm it does to a native community, isn't it? But you can include it. I thought about Achebe and Things Fall Apart because the Africans, the same thing happened to the Africans also. But then they were not colonized as much as Australia was or America was. They were colonized only as much as I think India was by the Britishers. After some years, they left Africa, isn't it?
Yeah.
That is the difference. That is why you put it. Fourth world literature means the settlers have taken over the land, the language, the culture of the native people, driven them to a smaller percentage and has settled there. They are not going away. They have settled there and call it their home. And so the Aboriginals become outsiders in their own country. So when you look at it like that, fourth world literature is more intense and it is more sad when the native is colonized in his own country, and they remain there. It is not the case with India. It is not the case with Africa.
Okay, madam. Thank you.
That is the difference. So you put it in post-colonial studies.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes.